Hi, I'm Kelly.
And hi, I'm Marianne, and you're listening to The
To the
Girlfriend
girlfriend
Guide.
guy.
I'm in such a, I think, delicate state of still finding my way that anything that interrupts that thought process throws me off. I'm like, what? I
So
don't get
let's talk
that.
about so let's talk about how each of us discovered Ellen.
I at first I thought it was, oh, quite by accident, or maybe a little, I don't know. But now I come to know that nothing happens in her world by accident.
Right.
I mean, so are you asking how I found her and then you found her, or how we found her and it ended up bringing us to where we are? I
Well,
guess both.
I mean, I think initially each of us found her independently of one another.
Yeah.
And then one of us mentioned it in a conversation, and you were like, oh, that's so weird. You said that because I've been looking at blah, 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 blah about Ellen as well. Right.
Yeah.
And then we just grew from there.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
well
like,
my
when's the first time you heard that name, Ellen of the Ways?
you know, I because I in my practice I use oracle cards, and it helps me focus on a task at hand, because I'm always going a mile a minute. So I
Yeah.
use oracle cards. Not only are they educational for me, but they help me to understand what I've experienced, and makes me like, oh, okay, you're not crazy. So I had
Right.
some, you know, I started to explore druidry, and is that something I wanted to explore? Because I want instant answers, because I'm all over
Mhm.
the place, and so I'm sorry, I just don't want to paint out of the lines here. Um, so I was in, I was camping out on the islands. I live on Long Island in New York, and I was camping, and I got lost in the woods. It's not something that normally happens to me. And it was almost like out of a movie. And I'm like, and I'm hearing stuff, and I'm getting scared, and then and then I'm there was just a lot of noise, not just like a lot of leaves, but nothing was there, and it, and different temperature changes. It was just strange.
Mhm.
Um, so that's just one example of looking back and saying, oh, that was her. So I consistently, during my oracle readings, consistently kept pulling this card, and it was her. Not once, not twice, not three times, four times. It was like 5 days in a row.
And
So there was
had you heard the name Ellen of the Ways before,
no,
or not until you got
no,
that Oracle deck?
correct.
Okay.
I had not heard the name. I didn't know anything about her. And then I started to really make the connections of how things have been affecting me over the period of time, and my connection to nature, and my connection to, elements and animals, and all this stuff. And so I started just kind of paying reverence to her, you know, referring
Yeah.
to her as, my patron, or patroness, and then I was on a community page, and two folks were talking about their I don't want to say it wrong, druidism, and they were
Druidry.
exploring that druidry. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. And one of the people mentioned Ellen of the Ways, and I nearly fell. I'm like, Ellen? Like, she was a freaking personal friend of mine. How do you know her? And I was really super excited, and I'm like, all right, there's got to be something to this. But like my usual fashion, I just want to go from one thing to another. I'm like, all right, so I'm going to get into druidry so I can get to know this goddess better. What I wanted to do is somebody else to do the work for me and tell me about her, but it's been, this kind of stuff for me has to be experienced, I know you're like super book smart and, I'm more of an experience kind of gal. And even at that point, I can't even put it into words, So,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden, not a cloud on the horizon. And then you had an interaction with her. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then that began our, I guess, spiritual journey together. I think it was at that point that I made the connection that she was in each one of us. And that she brought us together for this very reason, for this very moment of where we are in our friendship and our spiritual practices and our search. So I don't know, that's kind of the non-scholar version. So that's what I have to say about that. And I enjoy, I enjoy her presence, and you have helped me tremendously in the growth of that. So I'm eternally grateful for that. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it did. And I'm reading. I'm reading.
Oh, no fair. You're reading. I don't have any access to anything. I got paintbrushes in my hand.
Well, that's all right. I mean, I didn't need to read anything to relay my own experience. And the truth is, I don't remember the specifics. I just knew that I was. So it's while I was living in Pittsburgh, right? I lived in Pittsburgh for 4 years. And as you may recall, I was really into deer at the time because we had that patch of woodland outside our house. And I was fascinated with the deer. And I've always loved deer because I think I kind of feel the same way about deer as I do about wild horses, right? That they're these majestic,
yes,
powerful, magical creatures. So I was fascinated, and they're very used to people. Our complex had been there a long time, and so they would come down from the hill and they walk almost all the way up to the door and ring the doorbell. I mean, they got really close. And especially after we started feeding them, and only to find out later that was a ticketable offense in the county that we lived in. But then we found out our neighbors were feeding them too, so that made us feel better.
Okay, you can just blame them.
Right. And I'm sure that there were other people in the complex that fed them as well. Anyway, so it was in the middle of all of that, and I would sit out on that back porch late at night, just as the sun was setting behind the trees, and I could close my eyes and imagine, and I would sometimes feel as if an antlered woman was going to come walking out of those woods, like at any moment. And I was going to say, but she never did, but didn't she? Right? I mean, didn't she come to me that way in the guise of these multiple deers that we would watch throughout the seasons and watch the babies after they were born? And
right. Yeah.
And then I don't know, the first time I actually heard the name Ellen of the Ways, I think I was, as you say, I'm book smart. I'm a researcher. So I was researching something. I was probably looking into druidry at the time as well, because in that social group that we met in, that was kind of all the rage right then. And, I had read about other Celtic goddesses, like, the most famous of which is Bridget. And, somewhere in my searching, I just came across the name. And whatever I saw, I read, and I was like, oh, like an antlered goddess. And then I started thinking about that feeling, that eerie but not scary
Yeah. The
feeling that
same
I
one
would
I
get.
had in the woods. Yeah.
Yes. So, and then she started to appear in some of my, some of my feeds or things that I followed.
Yes.
Um, and it was like all of a sudden she was everywhere. But I don't attribute that to the universe as much as I do just because technology is always listening to us. And my phone heard me say Ellen of the Ways, and then if
Well, I mean,
there were
you
ads
can.
for statues, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, but
So
you could, go with that. That's still.
yeah. Anyway, so that was my experience, and after we interviewed both Carla and CG Dolan, I was wondering if, because that I have come to believe, and that's only recently within the last year, because I remember telling you about it from here, saying I am starting to think that Ellen of the Ways and like the OG goddess, the big goddess, the goddess of all other gods and goddesses are the same. So it's just kind of gone on from there. But I wonder if she is one of those primordial goddesses that has taken on these different guises over time.
Well, that's what I was thinking when we were having the talk with CG, when he mentioned that, the primordial. And you and I have talked about, her being the one, and all the various facets. Because like I said, I'm still really navigating this. You're kind of like my guide in a sense, because I really,
I'm the nerd.
No, well, your experience. You've been doing this your whole life. I just came out of the closet. You know what I mean? Like
I wouldn't say I've been doing it. I wouldn't go so far as to say I've been doing it my whole life.
Well,
I've had an interest in the occult my whole life, but as far as actually practicing things, I think that's only been in the last, I don't know, 6 to 10 years, I guess.
Well, that's still, So when I don't understand stuff, you usually have the words for it, which, so when you ask me to describe, what I think in terms of the goddess and how she works in my life, I get, because, I visualize the aspect, the triple, right? The mother, the maiden, and the crone.
Right.
Because Gaia was my first connection, and then Artemis and Hecate rolled into it, So I was going with that. I didn't understand it, as I paid reverence, and as I did spell work, and as I casted, different things started, like, it didn't fit anymore. And then I met Ellen, and then you had met Ellen, and you started talking about what if she is just another facet, and I like that. But, and we talked about this too, I felt like, if that's possible, then what about my worship and reverence towards the triple aspect, especially towards Gaia, since I had assigned her the role of my mother, the loyalty, that deep-seated loyalty that I have, and the punishment. And you brought that up. You were like, well, that's, your old belief system, that God is a punishing God. And I didn't even realize that, and I'm like, because, I have separate altars. So I'm always facing Ellen, like, and so, you helped me a lot with that. It's getting easier for me, because I really am starting to line up with the fact that she is all facets. She is Ellen. She is Artemis. She is Hecate. She is all Inanna, who I'm really interested in working with and learning more about. So, you know, I'm just trying to come together with all of that. So I think your patience, you know, with me talking about it, and you kind of help me fill in the necessary gaps, I guess. So I don't know. I try to use big words so I sound smart, but I really don't.
So the things that I learned, well, first, as with all goddesses or aspects of goddess, when I'm into something, I pick it up and I run with it and I read as much as I can. And Carolyn Wise's book, or Carolyn Wise in general, was really the only, what seemed at least to be, reputable source. But you have mentioned this to me in the past, and the thing that I'm looking at online right now, it's about, that there are some who believe that Ellen, before she was Ellen of the Ways, she was Ellen of the Hosts, and that was based on a real woman who lived in the 4th century. But in British legend and Welsh and Celtic mythology, that indicates that she may go back even further. Or she may have been a woman or a goddess of many roles that have become conflated in more recent mythology, right?
Isn't that true for most deities, if not all of them? It's pretty intense.
So are you aware of the dream of Maskin Weldig? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Welsh.
No, I am not.
So this is the most reputable source because it comes from
the Mabinogion.
And there's some of the earliest British stories that belong to Brits and the Britons. And the stories were completed in Middle Welsh in the 12th or 13th century from earlier oral traditions. So that's the source material. And, as a previous academic, I trust source material.
Well, yes, you made that very clear.
So in that work, one of the other tales in that book is Rhiannon.
Yes, I've heard of her as well.
So, it definitely, like most of our goddesses that we hear about in the United States, their origins are obscure, but when somebody can nail down an origin, it's always in Europe. It's always in Britain or Ireland or Scotland or Wales or...
It's not New York.
Right.
Not Illinois.
But I've asked this question before. So how can we trace the roots of how some of these goddess myths or stories find their way to the United States? Because they found their way to the United States before the internet. I can guarantee you that.
Oh, stories.
But stories from who? I can only assume they were stories from immigrants that came from Europe. When we were colonizing America and people were settling, and there's the Oregon Trail and all of that. I think that has to be when a lot of these myths arrived on American soil.
That's something to go down a rabbit hole about.
Yes, because I've looked into that with witchcraft too, right? Like that had to come from somewhere in the U.S. history of witchcraft. That's also pre-internet, right? Everything we have essentially comes from somewhere else, including the 3 major religions of the world, right? Because Christianity didn't start in America; it started in the Greco-Roman period.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's all very interesting.
Yes, just one thing just leads into another. That's why, our conversations can go on for hours on a Saturday morning, and all of a sudden it's like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Are you recording this? Are you recording this conversation? This is perfect content.
Well, I am now.
Well, now you are. I'm debating whether or not I should get in the car and go down to the shore, check out this moon. It's quite.
You got to finish that table.
No, it's not the table; it's the chair.
No.
And I hate it. I have this vision of the way shit's gonna look, and it doesn't come out. So I'm like, oh well. So, yeah, life's a journey, man. I'm glad I'm on it with you, bestie.
I'm glad I'm on it with you too. And I do remember, and you've mentioned this before, that when I would say, Marianne,
What?
Ellen brought us together.
And I was like, no, stop it. You're just copying me. You're just copying me. Leave my goddess alone. You've got there's 100,000 other ones. Go. Yeah, well. Yeah. Can't get rid of each other, can we?
Well, we could, but every day we choose not to, right?
Absolutely. She's giving me gas money. So, it's not like I'm going to have any more or less money to, I don't know. It's just, I look for any excuse to get out of my garage, to stay in my garage, like I just want to stay here.
But you can't.
I can.
You can't do that any more than I can just hang out in the backyard and never see another person.
Well, yeah, well.
Spiritual life is easy when you can dedicate all of your time to it.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't that the trick, is to learn how to have our spiritual life and be dedicated to it, regardless of the other things that we have to do in our day-to-day responsibilities? Isn't that the point, to learn those things and bring them into our daily living experience?
Why, yes, Kel, it is. You're all right.